Everybody, what's going on? Fabian for Liberty, fabianforliberty.com. All right, so I'm out in Florida doing some business here, visiting some family for the 4th of July weekend. So I've been a little busy this week. I did want to post this video a couple days ago. Actually, Monday, I did my Global Economic Reset webinar. And that was the day that Greece basically said, bank holiday till Thursday, till today. And I want to talk about Greece. I want to talk about an article that I posted to my GER2015.com website yesterday. I also posted it to my Facebook page on why Greece likely will not leave the euro. And if they do, what the reason is behind that, or at least what I believe, and based on some conversations I've had with some of the hedgies that I do business with, talk with, regularly, and what their clients are saying as well. All right, first, let's just go over, what's basically happened. Many of you know Greece missed an IMF EU debt payment of about 1.5 billion euros, about $1.9 million. They missed it on June 30th, right, Tuesday. It was interesting because the IMF came out and said, Greece is now in arrears. They didn't necessarily technically call them out in default. And the ECB, the European Central Bank, still has its basic emergency cash window open to Greek banks so they don't collapse, in spite of their in spite of them closing down banks from Monday to Thursday. Now, a bank holiday, there's been a lot of people talking about potential for a bank holiday here in America. Yes, eventually that will happen. And the reason they have bank holidays is typically for a currency devaluation or for the politicians can, in essence, come in and steal the money out of your bank account. Now, in the U.S., if there was a bank holiday, what would happen is that there'd likely be a major dollar devaluation, and they would use that devaluation in order to make emergency payments that would need to be made, whether it was to the Chinese or to the Federal Reserve or whoever the payments had to be made for pensions, what have you. Now, here's the deal with Greece. Look, people work in Greece until they're about 40. They retire. They collect pensions and drink ouzo on the beach. And, no one pays property taxes or taxes in general. So it's a completely unsustainable system. As I've said for years, one of the reasons that Greece likely would not leave the euro is because it potentially would expose the bond rigging or the complete financial fraud that banks like JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs have conducted in order to get Greece into the EU. Now, keep in mind that the EU, when a member is a new country applies for membership into the EU, they have to meet certain financial requirements. Even with all the fraud and deception that the big banks used to get Greece into the EU, they still didn't meet the financial obligations. But they were allowed membership anyway. So since from the very beginning, it's been absolutely nightmarish scenario where, they're bleeding money. They're technically bankrupt, as are a lot of other European countries or countries in the EU, and like America as well. And it was interesting. We on Monday in the webinar that I did, we talked about Uncle Sam going in to get a loan. If the banker looked at Uncle Sam's balance sheet of about $200 trillion in liabilities and in debt, and promises that they cannot pay, comparing that with their about $17 trillion in income from gross domestic product, the banker would in essence laugh Uncle Sam out of the bank. But unfortunately here, we don't deal with the same reality because it's the same bankers that would reject the Main Street loan applicant, somebody from Main Street to get a loan application would be more than willing to give it to a bankrupt country, because ultimately, when countries like Greece fail or the U.S. fail, the banksters come in or the creditors come in, maybe China, and they get to, collect collateral. They basically get repaid on their loan by either taking gold or taking land. And that's likely already happening. I've said this for some time, that the Chinese very well have could very likely have told the United States, listen, we won't dump your debt on the open market if you give us gold or if you give us sweetheart deals like they've been getting for solar fields and a bunch of other companies like Smithfield that they've bought over the last couple of years. Now, back to Greece, the risk of exposing the financial fraud globally is one of the reasons that potentially they would not leave. But here's, I think, the more important one, and that's that Greece is a NATO member. NATO clearly has looked weak in spite of Russian expansion into Crimea. They really don't have an answer. They really don't have a backbone. I don't think that NATO is ready to go to war against the Russians. Vice News actually had a great piece that they did about this. because most of those countries are bankrupt. They don't have the resolve. In fact, here in America, there's no resolve for more war. The Chinese, the Iranians, the Russians, they absolutely know this. So they're basically able to operate with impunity and do what they like. That's why you see China expanding in the South China Sea, 600 miles from Beijing. It's why you see Iran quickly developing a nuclear weapon. It's why you see Russia, really, I think, reacting to the aggressive measures by the West, which is really can't back them up, but it's like the loud bark with no bite from NATO. So NATO can afford to look weaker, and so that's why I think, and that's why many people that I speak to that have are on the inside on this believe that Greece won't leave NATO. Now, under one condition, here's one of the reasons that Greece could leave NATO, could leave the EU, and that's if they've already cut a deal with the Russians and the Chinese. This is extremely possible. In fact, it's already been going on. Vladimir Putin has been courting the Greeks, as have the Chinese, who are in the process of taking over, buying one of Greece's largest ports. So this is already underway. This would strengthen the Eastern Bloc that I've been speaking about now for years. It's part of the global economic reset. And I think that it is a logical move if you're China or Russia to try to pry some of these countries back into the fold, or not back into the fold, but to become aligned with the Russians and with the Chinese. Keep in mind, Greece is a very strategic location, close to the Middle East, close to Africa. So that is definitely a potential there. Now, a lot of people are asking, could this happen in America? Well, absolutely. Not only could it will happen in America. We've seen in the last couple of years, cities like Detroit, San Bernardino go bankrupt. And then we know states like California, Illinois, Chicago's bond system is being reduced to junk status. New Jersey, New York, these are states that have massive amounts of debt with the prospect of going bankrupt. So yeah, absolutely, not only could it happen, it's likely to happen in the U.S. I don't think anytime soon. I think the Federal Reserve is still going to continue its money printing policies to keep these markets inflated. But anything can happen, ladies and gentlemen. I'm definitely watching this closely. Hope you enjoyed this video. Again, check out GER2015.com, the blog for the article that I posted regarding the whole breakdown and analysis of Greece, of if this could happen in the U.S., and also how people continue to thrive, even companies in Greece. There's this great company called Cocomat in Greece. I shared in the blog article that in spite of literal economic collapse, this is a country that's turning a profit, continuing to expand. So I think it's always important to understand that in spite of the doom and gloom, those that create value are still able to come out on top. I'm Fabian Calvo, Fabian for Liberty, FabianForLiberty.com. Thanks for watching. I'm out.